Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. I am so glad to have you with us. I am the presenter today, so if you all could help me out, give me a shout out in the chat. Let me know if you can hear me okay. That would be great. As you all are filtering in, I would also love to know what state you're coming in from. We're going to be covering a ton of different screening laws this morning here or afternoon, depending on where you're at. So I just want to make sure we're addressing all of the states that we have here on the call. So we'll briefly here, just a quick few things before we start. One is we are recording this webinar. As you may have noticed, we are going to be sending everyone the recording tomorrow. And we will also send you any of the resources, the slides, and our sponsors' information in the follow-up email tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that, please. You will be getting it again tomorrow, the full recording and the slides and all the resources. Thank you all for joining. Leslie from Pennsylvania, Ellen from California, thank you for confirming as well. This is definitely a hot topic. There are a ton of new changes that have come about in the last several years, particularly in some states. There have been more than others, but I'm going to talk briefly about, what are some of the general changes we're seeing. We're going to highlight a little bit of what's happening at the federal level, some of the state and local laws that it may have changed, and I'm going to leave you some homework, right? So all of this is really so you can go back and make sure your processes are matching your local laws. Obviously, I can't cover all of them on this webinar, but I'm going to try to at least give you a good starting point from where you should probably, start your whole investigation. So briefly, though, before we begin, I did want to mention this webinar is sponsored by 1031 Capital Solutions, one of our favorite partners here at AAOA. So quickly before we start, because this webinar is made possible by them, we will be playing a quick video. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Give me just a moment. All right. Patience, everyone. I will pull it up in just a second here. Okay, and let's see. Okay, so I'm sharing over on this screen. Let me make sure I have the sound sharing ability here so you can hear. Okay.
Watching this, it means you probably own rental property that you're thinking about selling or have already sold.
And you're either tired of being a landlord or concerned about your state's attack on rental property owners, or your yield on equity is too low, or all of the above.
We're here to help you. We want to help you make informed decisions on whether to keep, sell, or 1031 exchange your current property.
And we want to help you change your life. We can build a diverse portfolio of passive replacement properties for you with the potential for consistent income.
Please take advantage of all the educational materials and videos on our website. Then schedule a call with us to find out how you may benefit from our solutions.
We really do look forward to helping you retire from being a landlord.
All right, everyone. I hope you heard that. I also want to launch a quick poll question for our sponsor. You might have answered already if you wanted one of their free books, which is How to Retire from Being a Landlord. If you said yes to that, you will be receiving it after this webinar. But also, if you would like to schedule a complimentary consultation to learn how to defer your capital gains taxes, go ahead and say yes there, and we'll forward your information along to 1031 Capital Solutions. I'll leave that up just for a little bit as we start into the presentation. Thank you so much for your patience. So give me just a moment here to pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, here's our PowerPoint presentation. So as mentioned, we're going to be covering the new rules of tenant screening. Protect your rental from fraud and legal risk. My name is Alexandra Alvarado. I'm the Director of Education here at the American Apartment Owners Association. I've been doing these webinars for almost 10 years now, so we've covered a ton of different sides of tenant screening, and it is always evolving. It never ceases to surprise me how many new things come out every year that we need to keep up to date with. So quick info here on the screen. If you do want to reach out to me, again, this info will be in the follow-up email. Couple of quick disclosures before we begin. This information is just for your own education. It's not technically legal advice. So make sure that you're checking in with your attorney if anything I say differs from what you're already doing, or if you have a question about a specific resident or situation. So today's agenda, we're going to go over some tenant fraud tactics, what you should be looking out for. What are some things that we've been seeing lately pop up? I've heard anecdotally stories from our own members that have been in unfortunate situations, really to no fault of their own. It's just that tenants are getting smarter. They're doing a lot of trickier tactics here to fool us than they were before. We need to keep up with the times, so we'll go over that. Also, we're going to talk about verifying ID, income, and references. So those are three very important things, right, that we need. But it's a little different now on how we can go about those things given some of the new laws. So we're going to go over some tips and also best practices for following the legal guidelines there. Also, setting smart criteria. How do you determine what is a good tenant, and how do you use that criteria then to select the right one? Then we'll touch on some background check laws, as I mentioned, local and federal. And then we'll go over what happens when you don't want to rent to someone. What are some of the approaches you can take there? And then lastly, we'll finish off with some solutions. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are some risk mitigation strategies that you can proactively take in addition to probably the tenant screening process that you're doing now. And then we'll finish with some Q&A. This will probably go over the hour mark, everyone. So don't worry, we are recording it. If you cannot stay for the full hour, I totally understand. But if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat. That will allow me to better keep track of all of the questions. I'm a one-woman show today, so make sure you put your questions in the question box so I don't miss them. So we're going to go over some tenant fraud tactics. I want to actually share a video with you that really puts into perspective what is happening in the world here of tenant fraud tactics. I'm going to go ahead and play this quick video here. Let me know if you can hear it okay.
They're refusing to pay. Investigators say they would move out, but only after multiple eviction orders. Our House Sheriff spoke with investigators about this case and how do they keep getting away with this?
Cameron, I had that very question as well. Investigators tell me that when the couple would notice a negative report to their credit bureau on their rental history, they would challenge it, saying it was a case of mistaken identity. The credit bureau would remove it, and the next renter would be none the wiser. Baldwin County Sheriff's investigators say Dwayne and Erica Daly developed quite the scheme over the last 4 years. Since 2021, deputies say the couple was able to live for free by not paying rent and dragging out.
Okay. So I hope you heard that video, right? We've seen here a couple that has basically banded together to defraud landlords. Not something I think none of you have heard about before, but at that scale, it is actually quite surprising that they were able to get away with it for so long. And so I think what we can see here is that any landlord can really fall victim to this. Clearly, there were several in a row consecutively that fell victim to these tenants. And so let's talk about some of these tactics. I know there were a couple mentioned in that video, but there are also more here that you may not have even thought about. So let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint back onto the screen sharing here for tenant fraud tactics. So couple of fraud tactics, and maybe then also we'll go over some of the smart landlord tactics you can take in counter to that. So real quick, my apologies here. Let me exit out of this. Okay, let's go to the next one. So disputing a rent-related collection. We saw that in the video. That is very common, or really disputing any collection. When a tenant disputes a collection, it essentially puts it on pause. It gives them a reason to maybe give you an explanation or potentially a story to go along with it. It will note it in the credit report if it's been disputed. It's not necessarily 100% a red flag, but if you do see a dispute, I would definitely look into it a little bit further. This will also, in the meantime, while it's being investigated, it won't affect their credit score or report. And so that's a common tactic. So make sure you're also calling multiple references. We're going to go over that in just a bit. Making sure you're actually talking to a human landlord who might have rented to them in the past is probably going to be a better way of going about it. Also, they might provide you a copy of a fake report. So maybe the report looks amazing and they tell you there's no need for you to order a report. I already have one. I just pulled a report. Now, there are some services that might make that process a little more secure, but I still really advise anyone on this call to run your own credit and background check. Get it from the source, a reputable tenant screening company, and make sure that when you're looking at that report, you're comparing it also to the one that you're, purchasing on your own. But I will say that if you already have a screening company that you're using for all your tenants, it's always good to keep that as well so that you have the ability to compare apples to apples. If you have a different credit bureau, different scoring model, the credit report is going to look different and it's going to be a lot harder to compare to applicants. So make sure you trust data, not people. And sometimes they'll ask for only one renter to get their credit check. They'll say something like, oh, you don't need to check both of our credit. We are married, or perhaps one of us doesn't even work or contribute to the rent. Little do you know, on that person's credit report that they want to exclude is where all of that negative information might lie. So just because a couple is married does not necessarily mean that everything gets reported the same on both reports. You are still able to have your individual account. I know a lot of married couples do that. So they might have completely different credit reports. Also, obviously, completely different background checks. So make sure that you are screening all renters 18 and over, regardless of whether or not they are going to be paying rent or whether they're going to say that they have credit history or not, which is another tactic, saying, I don't have credit, so don't even bother looking. Now, not looking is an option, I suppose, but it's really so that even if they don't have credit, that you're confirming that, right? That in itself is information. The lack of credit history is in itself a piece of data for you, right? So in any case, you want to treat all your applicants the same. If you're running credit on everyone, that's what you do. And regardless of whether or not they say they have credit history. Now, for the next slides here, another common one is a fake or deceased social security number. We have seen this even with juniors and seniors borrowing each other's socials to really pull up a completely different credit report, right? It might be their dad's or their son's credit report. So just make sure that you're ordering an SSN fraud report or the equivalent with your screening provider. It should tell you on that report when that social was issued. That's important. The status, so is it deceased? Are they alive? Any names or aliases associated with the social and the date of birth as well. Also, speaking of alias names, this is also a common one. People who change their names to leave a past behind, hoping that you don't check more than one name. So make sure you're ordering a previous address history report. This is a report that we offer with all of our screening packages that gives you a list of names associated and addresses associated with the social. So it will go back really far, decades in some cases. So you can find out if there's any previous maiden names or alternative names that you should be checking for the background check. Another common one is an incorrect date of birth. So just make sure you're collecting multiple forms of ID. We're going to go over that in a lot more detail on the next section. And also, I want to cover briefly before we start that section, tenant screening legal trends. So what are we seeing here in the grand scheme of things? Well, we're seeing that tenant fraud is increasing. These tactics are getting more prevalent. They're spreading on TikTok in some cases. We're seeing just in general more prevalence of that kind of fraud. We're also seeing a lot of legal trends that are pro-tenant, trying to help tenants in the screening process. Kind of puts us a bit in a pickle as landlords, but it's not all doom and gloom. As I said, we are going to go over some risk mitigation strategies and some things that you can do in spite of all of this. So some of these legal trends is really this movement towards source of income protection. We're seeing this really across many states, 20 plus states at this point, that have either implemented or are discussing implementing some sort of anti-discrimination law, meaning you cannot say no to a Section 8 or housing voucher holder. That is a source of income protection. In other words, you can't say, I only want a full-time employed individual. It must be any kind of income that you can verify. So that is pretty much trending across the US, even though it's not a federal law yet. Application and other fee caps and disclosures required. So there's a lot more now about, and this came through the Biden administration, of what is a junk fee, is what they were calling it, and basically targeting multiple industries that were not accurately depicting the fees that were being charged to applicants, making it difficult for them to compare to rentals or really to of anything in any industry. So that's also trending. Again, it's not federal, but it is something that has been targeted by many states. And also, speaking of disclosures, letting tenants know exactly what your criteria is has also been trending on screening laws, and criminal history bans or look back time limits. So some states, cities have banned criminal records altogether for the purpose of rental screening. Others have limited how far back you can look for criminal records. Standard nationwide is about 7 years due to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, but there are movements to reduce it from 7 years to 5 years to 3 years. We'll go over that as well. But what you're getting, at least from AAOA or Tenant Alert, if you're ordering there, is a 7-year look back period. Eviction record sealing is also a part of that. So a movement to seal eviction records that don't result in a judgment against the tenant. And also same thing with the evictions, looking at the look back time limit getting decreased. And lastly, credit report restrictions to reduce reliance on credit scores. Right now, we're seeing that happen more so with affordable housing, where they have been implementing laws in certain states to basically say, if they don't have a credit score or credit report, that's not the only reason you can deny them, right? You should still ask for maybe some other financial, stability documentation and whatnot, not just the credit report. So these are the trends, just broadly laying it out there. And we're going to dive into exactly what they are, what it means for you, how to, combat some of these trends that are coming up. So let's start with verifying ID, income, and references. So verifying ID. So immigration discrimination laws have also been trending. That wasn't on the previous screen, but certainly it's something that we've been seeing quite a bit in several states, where essentially it's saying you can't require someone to have a social security number to apply for your rental. Now, the key word here is require. So it doesn't say, most of these laws, as far as I can tell, it doesn't say that you can't ask for it. Now, check with your attorney if you want to be 100% sure, but my understanding is you cannot require that social security number, and doing so is considered discrimination based on immigration status, or of course, asking straight up if they are, what their immigration status is would also fall under that. But indirectly, if you require that social, you would be violating anti-discrimination, immigration discrimination laws. These are in California, New York City, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Illinois, Oregon, and Colorado. Again, I want to disclose my list may not be comprehensive. These are just the ones that I know of. And so when you get off this webinar, go ahead and check in your city, do I have immigration discrimination laws? In your state, do I have immigration discrimination laws? Because laws are not always just at federal, right? We know they go to state, county, and city. So you want to check at several different levels whether or not these laws would apply to you. So the next step here would be, if that's the case, is to accept any type of government issued ID. This would include a driver's license, a state ID, a passport, social security card, or even an individual taxpayer identification number, which is an ITIN. If you're not familiar with an ITIN, it's the same number of digits as a social security number, but it's provided to individuals before they get their social, and they can use the ITIN essentially in place of a social, and that can be used to open up lines of credit. It can be used to essentially do a lot that you would do with your social, right, in the meantime. Now, if they don't have a social or they don't want to provide one, you can ask for an ITIN instead. That will work. However, if they don't have an ITIN or an SSN, that just means you can't run the credit check, because they probably don't have credit, right? They're going to need one or the other to establish credit, but you can still run a criminal and eviction search if that's allowed in your jurisdiction. So background check is still very important there. And, you can work with what you have in terms of checking for finances and income and that kind of thing. We'll go over that as well, which would be a great way to supplement a credit report, or if they don't have one, it's especially important, right, to verify that. Okay, so make sure when they give you that ID that the name, addresses, and date of birth match. And if there's a variation, ask for an explanation. So on all the documents you're getting from them, always keep an eye out that the information is consistent. So on your application, on the ID, on any supporting documents. And you may even want to check metadata of a PDF or JPEG if they're sending you a photo or a PDF document to see if it is AI generated or photoshopped in any way. There may be some remnants of that in the properties of the image itself. I'm not going to go into exactly how to do that, but Google how to do it, and you'll see that is a great way to check if there might have been any alterations of the documents provided. And also, you can use Google Lens or tineye.com to do a reverse image search if you're collecting, let's say, pay stubs or IDs, just to make sure that there isn't a template out there online that they're just pulling and editing themselves. So that could also be a great way to find out if they are faking a document using a template that they pulled offline. Okay, when you get your credit report back, there are some warnings that you might see. So first of all, you may not get a credit report, right? That could be a red flag in itself. Make sure if that happens, you ask them, do you have credit cards? Do you have loans? Do you have credit history? Do you have any name variations? Are you sure you gave me the right social security number? So just because it doesn't come back doesn't necessarily mean they intentionally lied to you. Could be also that they just don't have credit or that they made a small mistake, but you always want to make sure that you're checking. Now, on the other hand, this is very important. Just because you do get a credit report back, that does not mean it's automatically a green flag either, okay? So I don't think a lot of people know this, but the credit bureaus are going to return a credit report as long as about 80% or so of the information that you entered or the tenant entered matches what they had on file. Their job isn't to verify that it's correct. It is to find the closest match in their system and produce a report. So just because you get a report, that still doesn't mean your homework is done. And I've heard that so much from landlords who say, well, I got the credit report, so why do I need to keep going? Credit report is not a form of ID verification, okay? Now, you do want to look out on that credit report for any AKAs or other socials. That should be a section somewhere in any report you're ordering, not just ours, where it will give any variations that have been used in the past. And you can also, as I mentioned earlier, that SSN fraud or SSN verifier report can also be ordered just to further double check outside of the credit report that the social is correct. And then also you can check the previous address history report, which I mentioned earlier is based on a social. Here's what a warning might look like. In this case, it is a positive just message here that says that it does match. But if it was actually not a match, you would see this in the warning sections. It would say the social security number does not match or the name provided does not match. So that doesn't always come up, but it will in many cases. So make sure you scroll down and see any warnings on the credit report as well. If you are ordering a previous address history report on AAOA or Tenant Alert, we do provide a report for that. If there is no addresses, if there are no addresses that we can find, we provide this message in front of you. And essentially it's saying that it's either incorrect or the applicant is too young or too new to the country to have established address history. So again, ask them if they have credit history. Verify the spelling of their first name in particular, because that's what we use for the address history report as well. And also that the SSN is correctly, maybe you entered it wrong, maybe they gave it to you wrong. So make sure you're going through those steps if you see this message. Okay, let's talk about income. So we know that income is unfortunately not a part of a credit report. So someone could have a really great credit score and not even be able to afford your rental. So the credit score is just one piece of it. The bigger piece, I might say, is verifying that they have sufficient income and stable income, hopefully, as well. So there are, of course, some laws around income. This is the California law. This is their definition of source of income. It means lawful, verifiable income paid directly to a renter or a representative of a renter, including federal, state, or local public assistance, local housing subsidies, federal, state, or local housing subsidies, but not limited to housing assistance vouchers. So that's basically Section 8 housing, okay? So it's basically saying here that it doesn't matter what the source of the income is, as long as it's lawful and you can verify it. That's key. Can you verify the income? Yes, you are allowed to do that. And if the income is coming from a housing voucher, yes, you are allowed to verify that as well, but you cannot discount that, right? It has to be a part of your income formula. So if you have a 3 times rent is necessary for the income, that's what you want, then you would need to include a housing voucher or any other kind of income that you can verify that is lawful in there. Now, there are actually specific laws for Section 8, not just that one. So I want to cover that briefly. So how is Section 8 different? Well, you can't have no Section 8 policy in many states. The list is growing. At this point, I can see this maybe going to all 50 states. I mean, it's really like every few months I see more states considering doing this. Basically is making it so that landlords really don't have a choice as to whether or not to accept a Section 8 voucher holder. They do have to go through the same screening process that they do with the individual tenants. But as long as the income and all of the other criteria match up, then you can't just deny them because they're Section 8. And now there's a couple cities, DC, Philadelphia, and Atlanta. There might be more cities. To be honest, I don't recall the last time I pulled these cities. So there might have been more added since then. So again, always check at the state, county, and city level. Most of these laws say that you can't require a larger security deposit or more rent for Section 8 voucher holders. I just read a story about how there was a huge lawsuit against one of the larger property management companies in a specific state that has this law. And essentially, they made them not only pay back all of the tenants that had Section 8 vouchers that they were charging more security deposit for, they also had to pay them like reparation fees basically to make sure that they never did it again. I mean, it really seems like at this point in time, we are getting to the point where now we're seeing enforcement of these laws as well. Whereas when they were initially passed, I don't think we had seen so many lawsuits. And now it's like every month or so, I see several really large ones. I'm talking millions and millions of dollars that landlords have to reimburse to Section 8 housing voucher holders because they're either denying them for the rental or they're charging them more than they should, or going through something that they shouldn't have done with the Section 8 housing policies. So just be very careful about that. Even if your state hasn't implemented it yet, it's still something that you may want to consider just starting considering that voucher holder as a source of income. And I also want to mention this is new in California specifically. I haven't seen another law like this yet in another state. I might be wrong, but this is interesting. Now, not only are landlords required to have this, Section 8 income counted towards their income for the rental, they also don't have to give you a credit report. So what you need to do instead for Section 8 applicants is provide them the option to provide alternative evidence of their ability to pay rent. Now, what is alternative evidence? Pay stubs, bank statements, proof of government benefits. So not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we have certainly, these are some things that landlords are checking anyway. But it is interesting to me to see that this movement away from credit reports is starting for Section 8 voucher holders. I can see this maybe spreading to regular applicants in the future. So keep an eye out for that. All right, more on verifying income and ID. So bank statements. Section 8 or not, it's probably a good idea for you to collect bank statements from the last 30 to 90 days. Honestly, that's going to show you a lot of information. The savings and checkings balance is not on a credit report. Okay, so that's another key component, right? How much are they making? How much do they have saved? So another thing you can do when you get the bank statement is check for the amount and entity of direct deposits. Do those match the pay stub details? Also, if they're using their bank account to pay rent, you should see that coming out of their bank account as well. Most people pay with check nowadays, right? Not cash. You can also check for a healthy savings and checking balance as well for a rainy day. Always nice to see that. Honestly, if someone didn't have a credit report, that means that they don't have debt. I would want to make sure that they have a nice checking and savings balance too. And that might actually still be a really good candidate, even though they don't have credit history. Also, when they give you an account number for their bank, if that's something you have on your application, you want to make sure it matches the general format of what that bank uses. That will be more likely to be a legitimate account if that's what they gave you. Tax returns are also a good way to verify income, at least from the previous year. So you can consider requiring that for self-employed applicants or all applicants if you want. So you can see what they made the previous year. It's usually a good indicator of what they might make this year. Also, the last two pay stubs. So of course, we mentioned how easy it is for people to fake documents and pay stubs with Photoshop, AI, and whatnot. So just make sure you're getting someone on the phone from that employer and confirming. And we'll go over some tips on how to do that in just a bit. And for things like other kinds of government benefits, I put here an example of Social Security benefits. This is just to say that any kind of income, any kind of government assistance or benefit should be verifiable. Like you should be able to look it up, give them a call, get a letter, something showing what that income is going to be from that particular source. So this is just an example here of one kind, right? Okay, other documents that you can collect. Proof of renter's insurance policy. This is a nice one. So they may or may not have one, but if they do, it really is a nice feeling, right, to know that they already have one in place. It also can match their previous address and also might have their name, of course, on it. So that's another nice way to verify address. Utility bills, too, that have their name and previous address. That's also helpful. And then you can verify that they really did live there. And also the letter of employment status if they're newly hired. So obviously, if someone's moving across state lines to rent your rental, you may want to make sure you get something from that employer, even if they haven't started yet, that shows that they are going to be starting to work and how much they might be paid. That'd be nice to know too. Also, any personal reference letters or guarantor letter if it's their first time renting. Maybe they're a college student, they haven't had a job yet, or they haven't had much history, right, on their credit or anything. A letter goes a long way, I think, in those situations. So keep an open mind out for some alternative types of documents that you could ask from these types of tenants. So let's go into those employer referrals. It's so important to really get somebody on the phone. Make sure you're verifying the name of the company. Make sure it actually exists on LinkedIn. You can also check for free on the Secretary of State. If you just Google Secretary of State and the state that the company is located in, you should be able to look up that company and verify that they're legitimate. You can also locate their website, their main phone number and email from the website. Call them and email them. Ask for their HR department specifically. Let them know that you have a rental applicant. You need to verify their income. I'm sure they've received calls like that before. So they'll tell you what their process is. With employment, it is a little different depending on which company you're reaching out to. So just make sure you have a signed application with that release ready. So if you're using an application from AAOA, it will say something in there to the effect of that they are allowing you to release their information, so you can, get an employment reference, and that will allow you to get information. Sometimes they might tell you, we don't disclose salary, but at least they work there. In other cases, they say we do disclose salary, but you have to pay $100 or something like that, or use a third-party company that we use to verify that. Honestly, I think it's worth the money, in my opinion, having, $100 out of my pocket, but knowing that that person does in fact make that much money is really, really just gold. I mean, information that you could use and lots of peace of mind there. Okay. Landlord referral. That's the next one. This one is tricky, right? It's not like every landlord has a company phone number, right? A lot of landlords, like some of you on the call, are independent and you might be calling someone's cell phone. So one thing you could do, depending on where you are, you could search public homeowner records, make sure it belongs to the landlord that you're calling. Another interesting one is a landlord test. You could call and say, I'm interested in learning more about your rental, as a test, and see if they're super confused or if they know what they're talking about. And they might say, oh, which rental? We have several. That's a good way to go about maybe testing if it's a real landlord or if it's just, someone's friend. Make sure you're also asking the right questions while you get them on the phone. I have a list of questions, and I'm going to provide these questions to you in the follow-up email tomorrow. So timely payments. Are people living there other than those on the lease? Would you rent to this family or person again? Are you related to them? Was the residence maintained? What was the monthly rent amount? That might determine what they can afford. Any problems with neighbors? How many people in the household? Any renter caused damages? When did they live there? Were there any pets? Did you evict them? Any additional comments? I love additional comments. You'd be surprised what people say when you say, do you have anything else I can add to this file? They might tell you a lot more than what you just asked here. And I always say it doesn't hurt to ask. So if you're worried about, should I ask this or not? Honestly, it's up to the person whether or not they want to answer those questions, and it doesn't hurt to ask. So just go with whatever you want to know, knowing that you may not get all the responses you want, but it is maybe more of a chance, right, that you're going to get it because you asked. So in summary, if we have some non-traditional applicants, just keep in mind that you do need a social or an I-10 for credit reports. If that applicant does not have credit history, that means they have no debt. Think about that. Does that matter to you? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? A neutral thing? Now, it depends on how you look at it, right? Also, ask for a U.S. cosigner with a credit history. So if credit history is important to you, you have an individual who doesn't have any, then perhaps your requirement is to get a cosigner or guarantor, as you may call it. They're the same pretty much. So ask for more references is another way to go about it. So maybe you might ask for, if you don't have a credit history, maybe you're asking then for, some personal letter, guarantor letter, employment, of course, as you might already be doing, and so on. So let's move on here to the next one. Oh, also for international applicants, we do international background checks, but they can be a bit pricey and take a while. So if you're interested, call us for a quote on that. And also you may want to require lease guarantee. We're going to talk about lease guarantee at the very end in the risk mitigation section. So stay tuned for that. That is another great strategy. Okay, setting SMART criteria. Question for you. Do you know what your ideal tenant should be like. What are you looking for? It's so good to do this before you have your vacancy so that when the time comes, it's a lot easier for you to just quickly know who is a good fit and who is not. You're a lot less likely to be, emotionally manipulated if you have a really refined criteria checklist. So how do we set that SMART criteria and why? Well, saving time, make it easier to choose, staying objective, and reducing liability because you're being objective. That's really why we're doing it. I've been preaching about this as a best practice for years. California just made it a requirement this year to state your criteria upfront if you are doing a non-refundable application fee. So for those of you in California, make sure you're doing your written screening criteria. If you're charging for an application fee, which I know most of you are. If you're not in California, though, I still think it's a best practice. I still think you should be doing it. I mean, why not tell somebody right away what you're looking for so you can decide if they're going to be a good fit and they can decide if they even want to apply, right? There are also similar laws in Minnesota, Washington, and Oregon. Again, there might be others that I haven't listed here. So make sure you're taking a look at your local laws to see if you do need to do this. Also, how do we do it, right? Think of your scoring sheet as a checklist. That's a common way to go about it. For every criteria they meet, they get a point. And then the tenant with the most points at the end will be your most qualified applicant. Keep secure records of your scoring sheets for each applicant. Now, note here also, same law in California, it does now say that if you don't refund the application fee, then you must give the rental to the first applicant who meets your criteria. So you can't just wait till you got all of them and then pick the best one if you want to charge an application fee. So I know it's a little confusing. This is kind of unique, I think, to California. I don't think I've seen this anywhere else. So just be a little careful here with California as to how you're going about selecting that tenant. Okay, a couple examples. The applicant has verifiable monthly income that is 3 times the monthly rent. Now, note here, might be less, right? It depends on where you are, cost of living, right? It also might be based on what you're comfortable with. Also on the type of rental. Is it a luxury rental? Is it maybe more of an affordable housing rental? You might want to be more flexible and require less income. It might not be realistic to get 3 times the monthly rent in some markets. Now that rent is so high, maybe you lower that, but maybe you want to see some money in the checking and savings account balance. So think about that a little bit flexibly. I'm just putting in an example. Also, you may want to say that you don't want to see any rent-related collections on the credit report or outstanding debts that are considerable. You could put a number on that if that is something you want to be very specific on. Make sure that the credit report demonstrates financial responsibility, that they haven't been sued by a landlord, that they don't have a history of evictions in the last 7 years, that they don't have a history of lease violations or noise complaints. That might come from a landlord reference, of course. So that's not something usually that's public record. But certainly if you found that from calling a landlord, you may want to have that as your criteria. That they haven't previously convicted crimes considered harmful to people or property. Criminal is very tricky, okay? There's a lot of laws that have come out about how to go about denying someone based on a criminal record. So if you have this as a criteria, make sure that you run it by your attorney first. And if you are going to deny anyone based on a criminal record, go through your attorney. It is certainly a lot more tricky. And as I was mentioning, we are seeing these types of laws enforced more now than they have been in the past. Also, the applicant's landlord references would rent to them again. So making sure that they're positive and that they didn't lie to you and that they didn't cause any damage exceeding the security deposit. This isn't comprehensive. This isn't everything you can ask. This isn't the only thing, but you can start here, okay, to start to think about some of these things that might matter to you. And some things might not matter to you as much as others. So just keep that in mind, and your criteria could develop over time. Also, background check laws. Okay, so we're going to talk about now, let's say you got the application, you have interviewed the tenant. It's time now to run their background check. What are you going to find, right? Okay, well, criminal is always on people's minds, right? We were just talking about that. There are lots of trending laws related to criminal. So in some areas, this is quite shocking, but landlords can't use most criminal records to deny an applicant, except for sex offender records. That is in Oakland, Berkeley, and Alameda County in California, and Seattle, Washington for now. There might be other places coming later, or restrictions on when you can use or look at a criminal record. I don't think Cook County is the only one with this law, but I put it as an example where you have to basically run all your credit check and ID verification, reference check, do all the things, offer the rental to the person if they qualify based on that, and then run a criminal record search separately after. What that means is that you basically are not using, this is what the law says, you're not using that criminal record for your initial decision. They want you to give a chance to the individual. So whether or not you agree with that, this is just something I've been seeing trending, not just in Cook County, Illinois, but in other places as well. So check that out in your local jurisdiction. Also, another trend, as we mentioned earlier at the beginning, is this look back period trend. So we're seeing diminishing from 7 to 3, from 10 to 7, 3 years for misdemeanors, 7 years for felonies in Detroit, Michigan, and Portland, Oregon now. So this really goes to your tenant screening company because they're the ones providing you data. So make sure you're asking how far back they're going. For AAOA, we block criminal records from the counties and places we listed up there. And also we go back 7 years. So just make sure that you aren't, accidentally using information that you shouldn't have. So you may want to make sure if you do get a record that is outside of that time frame, that you're not using it for consideration. Also, Minneapolis specifically has a no automatic exclusion law, although that's sort of what it's trending towards, right? There's a lot of guidelines that say you shouldn't automatically say no criminal records on your application, on your rental listing. I still think that's a good idea. So I recommend don't even mention criminal on your listings. But specifically in Minneapolis, they do say you aren't allowed to automatically say that you can't rent here because you have a criminal record. Will this spread nationwide? Absolutely, I think so. And there always is a growing risk of lawsuits with any of these new laws being passed. That's why I was saying it's so important if you do see a criminal record to verify that it is correct, talk to your attorney, because it is getting more and more restrictive. Okay, eviction. This one is very important. Some might say more important than criminal. If someone has been evicted before, that might change their future rent payments and what they're going to, be able to do here in the future. Federally, we saw HUD in 2016, they gave out their guidance on tenant screening. They updated it in 2024. And then the Trump administration removed the guidance from the website, but I will say it's still being referenced. It's still used as a guide. That's what it was. It was never law to begin with, but it was such a strong guidance that it almost became like law. And so when those guidances or guides were updated last year, that sort of stuck. So even though it might not be on the website, it's still something that is used by Fair Housing Act, fair housing lawsuits. I mean, it really is something to still put some weight on. And basically what that guidance said in the update is that AI, now is mentioned in the update, and automatic screening tools could be intentionally discriminating, AKA disparate impact. So that's unintentionally discriminating certain people of certain race, protected class, because you're automatically using some of these tools and you're not looking at the individual. That's what the guidance was basically saying. And also to avoid those automatic exclusions and to not rely too much on credit history and to not use criminal records or evictions that are old or irrelevant. I'll pause here because I think many of you are already doing all of this. Okay, I'm pretty sure most of you on the call aren't going to want to know if someone had a criminal record 25 years ago and hold it against them if it was something like a DUI, right? So, I mean, I think we're reasonably using some of these as best practices already. So just, keep doing what you're doing. If it's meeting all of these things where you're looking at each individual, you're making sure you're not putting out a blanket policy, you should be fine. And again, this isn't law, it is guidance. Also, trending state laws. So there are state laws that are putting some of this into actual law, and that's California, of course, that you can't report evictions older than 7 years. There are several places where the pandemic era evictions are sealed as well. In New York, we have some pandemic era eviction records sealed. And in Oregon, there's a limit of use of prior eviction filings, especially if the tenant prevailed. So I think we're going to see more about evictions in the future. Evictions were already removed from credit reports in 2017. We've seen, obviously, like this guidance come out that wants you to not just automatically exclude someone just because they have an eviction. We're looking at if it's an old eviction, don't use it. So I think for the most part, most of you are already following these rules. So keep an eye out for more laws like this in the future. Okay, so adverse action and declination. So let's say you have the tenant now, you've screened them and you're like, I can't rent to this person. They didn't meet my criteria. It's unfortunate. It certainly happens quite a bit. And how you go about that can have some legal repercussions. Criminal in specific. If you get a criminal hit, verify the type of crime, the date of the crime, the name and location of the crime. If you're unsure or the record is incomplete, call us. Unfortunately, criminal records don't have a ton of information on them. So although this isn't a law that's passed, many counties, cities, and states have been actively blocking criminal data from instant criminal nationwide searches. And so unfortunately, what that means is you might get a record back that maybe has a partial date of birth, or perhaps it doesn't say what the crime was. In those cases, you need to go straight to the court to find out the full information. We can do it for you if you want us to do that. But I just want you to know that there's also, in addition to all these laws, there's also these, proactively, states are proactively taking out pieces of data more and more. And so just make sure you have the right person, because it's making it a lot harder for us to identify a for sure record. We do the best that we can with the information we have, but it is certainly a challenge. Okay. Again, HUD guidelines, to quote it again, past actions unrelated to tenancy and past incidents unlikely to recur should not be the basis for denials. So I think here what's key is that it's unrelated, right? So does it matter if they, had an eviction a really long time ago because they lost their job during the pandemic? Or does it matter that they had that, as I mentioned, that DUI so many years ago? Probably doesn't make them necessarily a bad tenant today. So I think that's really the spirit of that guideline. And then, of course, if you have that set criteria, make sure you're applying it to all renters consistently. If you have an exception, even, you can, but that exception also needs to be applied consistently. If your exception is, if you don't have 3 times the monthly income, I need a guarantor. That's fine. As long as every time someone applies who doesn't have that 3 times monthly income, you ask them for a guarantor and you require it. So make sure your criteria, your exceptions, that's all consistent across the board. And if they don't meet that criteria, you're serving that adverse action letter, also sometimes known as a declination letter. If you're ordering with AAOA or Tenant Alert, you may not know this, but on the left of your report, there's a bunch of little items going down the screen. One of them is decline this tenant or declination letter. You can click there and it'll print out a letter for you. You can select why you decline them and provide it to them. It gives them a list of their rights, our information so that they can correct anything if it's inaccurate, and also give them the ability to get a copy of the report from us if they want for free. So make sure you're giving them that letter every time. Don't ignore them. Renters also have the right to request the report from the screening provider, which would be us, within 60 days, and they can dispute anything that is inaccurate. Note here, there is some new set of rules in California, of course, that also say that you do need to provide a copy of the report to the tenant. They can call us, but you can also provide it to them if you really want to just get it out of the way. Also, if you're taking adverse action due to a criminal record, make sure you're contacting us, your screening provider, or your attorney first. And this is the AB 2493 that has those additional rules in California about how to do the adverse action. I'm not going to go into detail on it too much. Most of this will apply to everyone on the call. In California, there's a few little caveats to that. Okay, we're at risk mitigation tips now. The final section, I'm going to speed through this. Obviously, we want to keep screening tenants. Tenant screening is still valuable. I know some of you might feel like, oh, we're just not getting enough data. There's so much going on. Still do it, right? You still want to get that full credit, eviction, and criminal if you're allowed to. You want to add that social security number fraud report, add in some tax liens and civil judgments. These have been removed since 2017 on all credit reports. So you do need to order that separately. That's going to show you if they owe any money to the IRS, or they sued for any reason, not just an eviction, right? You can be sued for damages. You can be sued for, anything really in small claims. So make sure you're getting that civil judgments report. And you can also add manual county criminal searches. Ask us about it. We can add that for you. It's not automatically included, but that is the best way to get the most up-to-date data. I mentioned many counties and cities are drastically limiting the amount of data available online. And so sometimes the only way you can get a full criminal record is by doing a manual search with that county. So let us know if that's something you're interested in, and we can add it to your account. Okay, next, renter's insurance. No, it is not just for renters. It is for landlords too. You should all be requiring renter's insurance. And I've been saying this for years. Keeps you out of it. Helps you to prevent any sort of disputes where the tenant is coming to you to get payout. Instead, if they have renter's insurance, they're going to go to their renter's insurance first. If they try to go to you, you say, go to your renter's insurance. They'll pay you out. Dog bites, guest slip and fall, theft of their personal belongings, natural disasters, basically anything that's accidental here that happens on the tenant side, the renter's insurance can cover. Up to a certain amount, of course, but that at least helps you to prevent them from coming straight to you every time something like this happens. It's pretty affordable. Should cost them more than $20, $30 a month. Make sure you're listed as an additional insured on their renter's insurance so that you get notified if they cancel at any point during the lease term. Here's an addendum. I'm going to provide it in the follow-up email as well that you can add that basically signs off, the tenant will sign off that they have renter's insurance and they are going to keep it for the full year. You can't force them to get a specific insurance agency, but you can make it easy. So here's a link to share with your tenants for Liberty Mutual. We do have partnership with Liberty Mutual. So if you want to send them there, they'll give them a quote for renter's insurance. And, it doesn't really matter which one they're using as long as you're listed as an additional insured and it covers some of these items I've listed here. Okay, another way is rent and debt reporting. So unfortunately, just for so many years, rent payments were not reported on credit reports. It was only something that was available to really large property management companies. Now that has changed. This service is available to landlords of all sizes. And what that means is you can report every payment that the tenant makes for rent as a line of credit on their credit report. It will help build their credit if they pay rent on time. And if they do not pay, it will harm their credit. In California, there is some debate as to whether or not you can do the negative, but in all the other states, you certainly could do negative and positive. Now, it's up to you, right? If you want to report negative, I think a lot of you probably would, then let your tenant know when they sign that lease, hey, we're going to be reporting positive and negative, and we need you to sign that that's okay. And, it's going to help you if you're planning to pay rent on time every time. That's going to also be for all three credit bureaus, preferably. Not all companies do all three, but obviously that's preferred. And then again, when they know that it's going to be reported, they're more likely to pay. Front Lobby is a great company that AAOA members have been working with that basically has told us that 96% of the tenants on their platform are paying rent on time, which is crazy to me. So just, I think, by the fact that it's being reported, it's already encouraging that so much more. You are required to offer it in California if you have 15 units or more. There's some more exemptions on that. Even if it doesn't apply to you, though, if it's not required by law, I still think it's a really beneficial tool to use. And with Front Lobby, you basically either can pay for the tenant if you want, like an annual subscription, or you can not pay anything and just have the tenant pay $5 a month directly to Front Lobby. So if you want to sign up for that, I have the link here. I'll include it in the follow-up email as well. I do think it's a great way to make sure that the tenant knows. And then if there is a debt, they also report the debt as a collection. So I mentioned that you might see a collection on someone's credit report to a landlord or a property management company. That's something they could do for you. And you don't necessarily need to have a judgment for it. So make sure that you're also reporting any debts that maybe an old tenant who left already still owes you. Why not, right? What do you have to lose? And lastly, we'll go over reducing risk, lease guarantee, which I referenced at the beginning. Lease guarantee helps you get reimbursed for court judgments from $1,000 to $10,000. If you're confident you can get a court judgment, but you're not confident that the tenant is going to be able to pay it, then the lease guarantee can step in and make sure you get that money. Quick facts, we know collection agencies aren't all that successful and most judgments are never collected. So what this does is it gives you that court judgment right away, and then lease guarantee will continue to hunt down that debt from the tenant, but you don't have to worry about it. You already got the check. So here's our link here to lease guarantee. Again, I will include that in the follow-up email. And really what we're doing here is we're reducing our risk, we're protecting rental income, filling vacancies faster perhaps. If you have maybe an applicant who doesn't quite qualify, maybe one of your exceptions is that if they get lease guarantee for a certain amount, that they will be able to get the rental and you'll feel more comfortable with a security deposit and a lease guarantee in hand. Ultimately, peace of mind. These are the rates, because I know I get that question a lot of what it costs for each level of protection. These are base rates, so they might go up if the risk is higher for the tenant. You can add it, as I mentioned, to a security deposit. You can tell them, hey, instead of a cosigner, you can just get a lease guarantee. Or in some cases, I've even seen some landlords that reduce the security deposit if it's a really good tenant with good credit and whatnot, but they would rather pay for a couple $100s up front instead of thousands of dollars in a security deposit. Or you can pay for it and you can charge the renter yourself or just use it as an investment, as a risk mitigation tool. So a couple of FAQs I get quite frequently, I'll address them now. It is for new renters only. And also if they don't have a credit score, they won't be approved. It's an annual contract, so it does need to be an annual lease. It does not automatically renew, but you can decide if you want it to go for another year. And it doesn't matter who pays for it. It's still going to be your protection on your lease, and the renter is still liable for that debt. And only one lease guarantee is required per lease. So if you have a couple or roommates, you only need to get one, and it'll cover any individual on that lease. Just make sure that they're signing everything and that you're actually putting them on the lease agreement. Lastly, reducing risk with a cosigner or guarantor. That's really just so that you have more responsible parties, more people to go after, you're more likely to get paid. Make sure if you do get a cosigner that you're screening them at least with a credit check, and make sure you're listing all those cosigners on the lease, any notices, renewals, anything you revise. It has to have basically like as if they were a tenant, their name has to be on everything. And you can combine that with the lease guarantee. I mean, you could do a security deposit you could do a cosigner, you could do a lease guarantee, and now you have like triple the amount of protection. Not to mention if you also have renter's insurance if something goes wrong. So I think really that's going to be one of the best strategies moving forward for landlords, given everything that we've seen today with how laws are changing, how tenant screening is being restricted, and how scams and fraud is really, increasing. It really is becoming more important to have more risk mitigation strategies in place. And here's a quick little clause you can add if you did want to add it to your lease. Again, I'm not an attorney here, so maybe they'll work it out for you, but put something in there that basically says that they're appointing the renter as his or her agent of service. Okay, we're done here, guys. We're past the hour. Sorry it went over. If you want to join the association for free, you can. I know a lot of you are members here. Some of you are not. You can go to AAOA.com for that. And then also I put in our contact information in case you want to reach out to any of us here. Our staff does pick up. Sometimes I pick up the phone. So definitely give us a call if you have questions about anything, and we'll be happy to support you with your tenant screening needs. Our email is there as well in case you need to reach that way. And I'm going to be sending you the full recording and slides tomorrow. So don't worry if you missed anything. I know I went over a ton of information today. And now I'm going to look at questions. We have 19 questions on here. Let's get started. So make sure, again, you're putting your questions in the Q&A box if you want me to answer them. I'm going to try to go through as many as I can today. Okay, we have our first question. Kathleen, what about Zillow credit check when using their rental services? So Zillow does do credit checks. It is going to be, though, pretty much just the credit report, criminal and eviction. So you're not going to get the SSN fraud, telecheck, lease guarantee, tax lien, civil judgments. Those pieces of information will be missing. You're also probably never going to talk to a customer service representative. So we are very proud of having people here who answer the phone right away. If you do want that kind of support, I do recommend that. We do have now what we call an apply now link, where you can add links to your rental listings that go directly to an online application in your AAOA account. So if you do want somebody to apply, Tenant Alert has this too. You can just use that link on Zillow and then start screening people who have applied through your link. If you want us to create a link or you need help with that, I'm going to put that in the follow-up email. You can go into your account and create one and post it anywhere you want. Okay, Liz, if we're unable to get a credit score due to lack of social or ITIN, can that still be considered insufficient credit if we require a minimum score? I would be very careful with anybody who's Section 8 housing, particularly in California, right? As far as I know, yes, that would be a reason, but again, it gets tricky because there's states like California, and I mentioned those others where you don't want to discriminate based on immigration status. So I would check in with an attorney just to make sure that that's okay in your area. Haley, how do you verify Section 8 income? So typically Section 8 will either cover 100% or a percentage, maybe 60, 70, 80% of the rent amount. If it doesn't cover 100%, then you do need to still verify that they can afford the 20, 30%, whatever it is that they have to pay out of pocket. So you're still able to verify income if it's employment or child support or anything like that. For Section 8, they should be giving you some proof of income. You'll be working with Section 8 as well. To the local housing authority will be working with you to basically give you the money. So it is in essence verified already, at least what is being provided by the public housing authority or the housing voucher. So you should know what that amount is going to be. What you need to do on your own is verify if they can also afford any amount that isn't covered by the housing voucher. Todd says, Section 8 tends to take a long time to process. If the owner wants a qualified tenant ASAP, can you deny a Section 8 applicant if they're competing with a non-Section 8 tenant? So this is tricky. I mean, it really is a matter of how you are going about your screening process and not showing that there is a specific discrimination against Section 8 applicants. That's what you want to avoid. And so let's say you have multiple people who are applying and you're reviewing each application. If the first tenant who is qualified and has completed the application and you have all of their information, that the safest way to do it is to just approve that person, right? So let's say you got a Section 8 applicant, they gave you everything, you got the report, you have all the things you need, it's done, but you haven't given them a decision because you're hoping someone comes in who's not Section 8 and qualifies. That's where it could really kind of look bad in some cases. So I would say it's best to go in order of who has a full completed application and then screen them in that order and then decide in that order to be safe. But check with your attorney if you aren't sure, or if you're in a situation where maybe it's a little like nuanced if they applied at the exact same time or something like that. So definitely check on that. Okay, next one here, Jamie. What if the applicant or guarantor are retired and they only have a retirement account statement? Well, that's up to you if you're okay with that. If you're comfortable with that, sure. I mean, it's fine if they have some money in that account that they could liquid money that they could pull out. If they're going to be paying for rent, or if they have in the past for that applicant, then maybe that might help to ask as well and see proof of that. Ultimately, the reason you want that guarantor is in case that the tenant can't pay, right? Or if, they don't pay, that you can also report it on the guarantor or co-signer's credit report, and it will negatively affect their credit report too. Therefore, hopefully they'll try to step in, right? They'll have a reason to step in and pay. So again, it just comes down to whether or not you're comfortable with that. Janice says, some California lawyers have written that Section 8 requirements don't apply to month-to-month property rentals. Is that accurate? Kind of. So there are definitely some differentiations in California law between month-to-month rentals and annual leases. Also within like LA County and in the Bay Area, there are also differences. So you may want to check with your local attorney. If you go from an annual to a month-to-month, does that reduce your requirements? Because it might in some cases. If it does reduce your requirements, then you might think, oh, I'll just go month-to-month now. However, I will say the tricky thing with that obviously is that they could leave at any time. So just take that with a grain of salt. If you want to have a month-to-month tenant, because you want to avoid some of these laws, that's certainly a strategy, but make sure you talk to your attorney and find out which laws you would be avoiding and if it's worth it, or if you would prefer to have that annual lease. Okay, Brenda, if the state restricts a landlord on checking credit reports for Section 8, how do you legally apply the same criteria to all applicants? Just by trying to comply with this law, you run the risk of discrimination against other non-Section 8 applicants. I kind of agree with you, Brenda. You make a good point, and it is confusing for sure. They want you to treat everyone equally, but actually not really if they're Section 8, right? So I understand it's confusing. Again, it is what it is. I think you kind of have to work with the law and what is coming in. Brenda says our criteria, you also said our criteria is based on the number of collections or dollar amount, number of late pays, not credit score. Only to get that info from a credit report. So unfortunately, you're just going to have to find the equivalent to what that would be in terms of like other financial, I guess, stability indicators from, let's say, a bank statement or tax returns and so on. So check again with your attorney and see what they might say to that. But I mean, you make a good point. Unfortunately, it's very confusing how California has done basically a different set of rules for Section 8, but they also don't want you to discriminate, right? Totally understand the frustration there. Janice says, why wouldn't landlords just ask for 2 years of pay stubs if salary information isn't available? You certainly could ask for more pay stubs if you want to ask for more. Sure. I mean, it depends on what system they're using. It may not even go back that far, though. If they're an online sort of company, they might have pay stubs going back a year. I don't know if they'll all go back to 2 years. But certainly if you want to ask for more pay stubs, you can. There's no law preventing you from doing that. Okay, James says, I had a tenant that did not have a social security card and I couldn't run a credit check. I got his bank statements and felt the tenant was solid based on my conversation with him. So I asked to have a three-way call with his banker. That worked well since the tenant could allow the banker to talk to me to review the tenant's banking activity and banking history. Love that idea, James. I didn't even think about that. I mean, if the tenant is cool with that and they want to have a three-way call, certainly could verify the banking history as long as he's okay with that. So love that idea. Great way to verify that the bank account information is correct. Again, it's funny, right? We have all this AI, Photoshop, all these things that kind of help make these documents fake. And at the end of the day, it's that human connection, human interaction that we can still rely on, hopefully, to talk to a real person and hopefully get the right information. That's a great way around it. Joel says, if you always refund the application fee for all tenants, so I'm assuming you're in California, Joel, do any of these cautions in the criteria apply? So yes, so yes and no. So like some of them do apply, some of them don't. So like I know there's some landlords who are actually choosing not to even charge tenants in the first place in California because that gives them a lot more freedom with the criteria and the other sort of the other regulations that are in place. So take a look at it. Essentially, they want you to use written screening criteria. That's why they made the law. But yes, it does technically say that if you're not charging an application fee or you're refunding it, that you can forego some of those requirements. So take a look at the law. You'll see where it says, if you're charging a fee, this is what you can do versus if you're not. David says, how much of a renter's deposit can you hold back after the tenant vacates the property and leaves the place in bad shape? It could take a couple of months to fix before the property can be rented out again. So again, this is going to be state specific in some places, but in general, you can hold back the full amount if you also give them an itemized statement of why you're holding it back. If you don't know how much it's going to cost, you can go based off estimates. So you can get estimates from contractors, estimates for your time and whatnot. Really what you're doing is creating a case for why you are withholding the deposit so that if the tenant decides to sue you to get the deposit back, then the judge would look at what you charged and they would say, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And, we're not going to make you, give that money back to the tenant. So that's really what I would keep in mind at the end of the day. If a judge was looking at it, what would they say? And then in your local jurisdiction, they will probably have some limit as to how long you can, or how many days you after they move out, you have to give them that itemized statement and give them the notice that they're not going to get their security deposit back. So just, take a look at some of those limitations there. And Rita says, what can a landlord charge for his or her own time? There's no specific dollar amount, but you want to be reasonable is what it said. So like if you were to hire a property manager, more or less what they charge for their time, that would be maybe a good way to go about it. It is tricky though. I know a lot of landlords, they don't end up charging for their time because it can be so subjective. And again, if a judge was looking at it, would they agree with you? Depends on the judge, maybe. So sometimes I just see landlords avoid it altogether because it's just not a clear cut cost, like an estimate, even at least it has, somebody telling you on an itemized, what they're going to be charging you for. Yeah, definitely you can, but look at what's reasonable. And I wish I had a more clear answer for that one, but there isn't, unfortunately, a number out there that I've seen, at least in the law. James says, if a tenant has a drug conviction that is fairly current, can you deny the application in Pennsylvania or New York, non-metro? So it depends on the type of drug conviction. If it's I think illegal distribution, so if they're a drug dealer kind of situation, it's treated a little bit differently. There are some exceptions for that level of conviction. If it's they were caught with a little bit, I think it's different. So definitely take a look at that and see if it's, I think it's the intent to illegally distribute something to that effect. That would give you a better idea of whether or not that's a reason to deny them. And then again, you mentioned conviction. I'm glad you said that. If they're arrested, if they are currently being tried, there hasn't been an actual conviction, then you should not use it. So make sure it is a conviction. And I think it's safe to say you'd be able to use it. But again, always talk to an attorney if it's criminal, especially. Okay, Haley, from where can I get the eviction report? You can get it from AAOA.com. So you have the website up here, or tenantalert.com. That's another place as well where some of you have come from. Either one, all of our packages include an eviction report. So it's usually just a part of it. And then you can also order it a la carte if you wanted just the eviction report by itself. Haley says, is the declination letter required by law? Yes. So you do want to give that letter out every time that you're declining somebody with their rights. Jerry says, how do you handle an applicant who has no current source of income, but they have a bank statement that shows significant savings? Well, it's up to you how you want to handle that, right? Do you think the savings are enough for them to live at your property? If it's, an annual lease, do they have enough for the 12 months? That's a factor. Are you in a state like New Jersey where you have to automatically renew the lease if they paid rent on time, but you don't know if they're going to be able to afford the next 12 months? That might be a factor as well to consider. But really, it's up to you how you would see that. Are they on the job hunt? I think if they have 12 months worth of, cost of living and rent included in that saved up, that would be quite a bit of money. But that might not be too bad. So take a look at that and what you feel comfortable with. Rita says, how can I report late rent and where? Rita, Front Lobby is the name. I will send you guys the link. There is a special offer for AAOA members, and I suppose anyone on this webinar, because I'm going to share the link with you and the promo code where you can get a discounted rate on that. So it's certainly possible to report late rent, and we're going to have a webinar about it actually in a couple of weeks. So I'll include an invite to that as well if you guys want to come on and learn exactly all the ins and outs of reporting late rent. Also, Tausif says, can you provide a list of collection agencies for the collection of judgments? So we are working with one collection agency that is national. They're called Syncom Corp. I will also include a link to that in the follow-up email. They're excellent. They work specifically with rent. So a lot of collection agencies, they do all kinds of industries. They do medical, business, whatever, retail. This specific one works almost just with rent collections. I think they do a little bit of medical on the side, but I love that because that's hard to find. So they know this industry really well, which means they're good at actually collecting, and they've been doing it for about 30 years. So I'll send you guys that link as well. David says, I'd like to know if anyone here has used lease guarantee or other services. If any of you have used lease guarantee, put it in the chat. David, we've had thousands of our members use it to this point, and we've had, I think, quite a few of them, I think most of them, where they don't file a claim. But certainly if anybody has an experience, feel free to drop it in the chat. Rita says, book please. Okay, I think you might be talking about the How to Retire from Being a Landlord book, which we can certainly send to you as well. If you answered yes on the webinar registration, you're going to get that book. Patricia says, if we have lease guarantee for a tenant and get a judgment against them, does lease guarantee report it to the credit bureaus? Usually, yes, that is one of the first steps. However, at that point, you've already received the money. So lease guarantee will go through basically what a collection agency does, which is report it on the credit bureaus, to the credit bureaus as a collection, and then also pursuing the debt in other ways like wage garnishment, if possible, or other, collection agency methods. Okay. Angela says, what if the tenants buy renter's insurance and showed it to the landlord, but later they canceled it? Make sure that you are checking out the policy and contacting the insurance so that you are listed as an additional insured and you get notified if they cancel. All right, Jeff says, what is your fee for tenant screening and credit reports in San Diego? So the fee is the same nationwide. It's going to be between $30 to $50. If you are a member of the association and you pay for an annual membership, you do get a couple of free reports and $5 or $10 discount. So take a look at AAOA.com. You can check out on the top menu, it says tenant screening, and then screen tenants to see all of the prices on our site. Viraj says, can landlords add legal fees recovery from tenant and lease for any future eviction outcomes? Future. Yeah, so you can. So usually the way that it works is in a lease, if you say that they're responsible for the legal fees, it's usually the prevailing party. So whoever wins doesn't pay the legal fees. The other person would pay the legal fees. The only problem with that type of clause is that if the tenant sues you successfully, you have to pay their fees. If that's something you're comfortable with, talk to your attorney about adding a clause like that. But typically it has to be both. So it has to be, you know, if you win, they pay you the fees. If they win, you pay them the fees. Okay, David says, do all these rules apply if you rent out the property as a kind of Airbnb? No, not necessarily. So that's like super short term. Definitely look at your local Airbnb laws, because I know a lot of states are coming out with new laws for Airbnb holders. So there might be some differences there, but typically no, because it doesn't last a month or longer. Roya says, is a declaration letter mandatory in California? Declination, yes, it is. Ellen says, do all or most of these guidelines apply to roommates or temporary tenants or roommates sharing a house, or is that a whole other set of rules? So there are some laws that specify that there are exemptions, right? Usually those exemptions apply to a single family home or roommate situation. However, I will say that most of what I cover today would apply, and all of the tips and the risk mitigation strategies I still would encourage you to use, even more so perhaps if they're your roommate, because you're going to be living with them. Okay, so you want to make sure you have someone decent you're living with who's going to be a good roommate to you as well. I can offline give you some more specifics, Ellen, on how it might be different for roommates, but for the most part, a lot of it will apply, and the guidelines are really great regardless. Selena says, what background software do you use for running potential tenants? So that's, again, AAOA.com or tenantalert.com as well. It's the same data for both companies, so you can take a look there. Amir says, when a potential tenant is a problem tenant, chances are that their existing landlord wants to get rid of them. So when you call that landlord for a reference check, how can you tell if they're being truthful? Amir, I wish so much that I had like a built-in lie detector, because my life would be so much easier. Unfortunately, we don't quite have that. Some of you are really good at it, though. You can tell when someone's not being completely honest, which is amazing. But what I say is always, again, it doesn't hurt to ask, right? If you're talking to someone on the phone and you feel like they might be lying to you, maybe you do need to do a little bit more research, right? It's still better than not calling, because worst case scenario, maybe they were willing to give you information and you never called them. You missed out on a lot of information you could have had. So make sure that you're still doing it. I know it's pain. We can do it for you if you want to pay us to do it. We're just picking up the phone as well and making those calls. You can add it to any of your tenant screening reports. So on the add-ons, I believe it's $15 per reference that we verify, whether it's employment or landlord. All right, Viraj, Section 8 denied rent increase, citing paperwork and their workload. It was finally approved 8 months later. Can landlords process eviction based on rent shortfall during the gap time? No, the eviction would be based on the tenant not paying. So if you're asking for a rent increase, that's like a separate agreement with Section 8, as far as I understand. So not a reason to evict the tenant, but it is, I know, one of the reasons why Section 8 can be a little frustrating to work with, because they're usually basing it off of like market rate rent. And so that can vary and take some time to get approved. Okay, Eric says, in the absence of SSN or ITIN, where a credit report cannot be pulled, would it be deemed discriminatory if a landlord ups the security deposit? Yes and no. It depends on where you are. I would be a little careful with that. So like I mentioned, if there's Section 8 housing, again, going back to that, then yes, it is discriminatory. You can't ask them for extra security deposit. As I mentioned, there was that huge lawsuit for millions of dollars that just recently was settled that basically made the landlord pay back all of the extra security deposit and rent that they were charging Section 8 housing plus more. So be careful with that one. I believe if they're not Section 8, there's some flexibility there. You might be able to do that. So certainly ask your attorney just to make sure, but that might not be a bad idea. Or you might also want to do like a lease guarantee sort of thing where maybe you have them purchase lease guarantee. Okay, Andy says, if I ask the tenant to pay for the AAOA background check, is that considered an application fee? Yes. So a background check is an application fee. Sometimes, although not as common anymore, a landlord will charge for their time and include that as part of the overall fee. But it does need to be within the limits of your state. So even some cities or counties might have other limits, but usually at the state level, there's a limit. If there's no limit, obviously you can charge what you want, but at a certain point, people aren't going to want to pay for it or apply. So be careful with that. But a lot of landlords just avoid charging for their time. Again, going back to even the security deposit question we had earlier, it's just such a vague thing to charge for your time that it can easily be questioned. And so a lot of landlords do just avoid it just to not have a problem. Andy says, how does the lease guarantee work? What does it cover? Are there exclusions? So I'll send you guys some more information about lease guarantee, but it basically covers a court judgment related to the tenancy. So it can be damages, it can be unpaid rent, but it has to be related to the tenancy and it has to be a judgment. So that's pretty much as far as the requirements go. But there are some terms and conditions. It's pretty short. It's actually just a couple of pages that you could easily read through, and it'll give you some of the exclusions, although there really aren't many. It's more so of just, making sure it's a part of the monetary judgment. And Janice, what about initial shorter term lease of 9 to 11 months? Not sure if this is maybe in reference to that one question about if you do a month to month, if it's different than an annual. So it depends on where you are, Janice. Check it out. In some states, it might say for leases that are 12 months or longer, it's this. Or in other cases, it might be if a lease is month to month versus if it's, more than 1 month. So just be careful with that because obviously 9 to 11 months is more than 1 month. So it might fall into a different category. Tammy says, Section 8 doesn't say you can't rely on a credit report only. It says that you can't solely rely on it. That's correct. Yeah. So what that is basically saying in California specifically, Tammy, is that you should also be looking at other forms of financial proof of stability, right? So what is that? We went over a lot of those documents. You might already be pulling that for your regular tenants. So just make sure that if you don't have a credit report or you don't get one, or even if you do get one, that you're also, making sure you're not just doing the credit report and you're giving them a chance. That's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it so that landlords are giving Section 8 applicants a chance. Marion says, if the unit is the 15 units owned by the landlord represent 15 units in one building or 15 units in multiple buildings? Okay, so this is in regard to the rent reporting law. The rent reporting law in California, it says 15 units. My impression is that it is in each building, but double check that with an attorney to make sure. I don't want to give you bad information. So you want to make sure if you're exempt or not from that law. It also has another thing that says that if it's an LLC, that it doesn't matter if it's 15 units or not, something like up to that effect. So I think it matters if it's an LLC, like the title it's held in, and also the number of units. And again, I'm not 100% sure if it's in multiple buildings or just one. We do have a legal chat service though, so I'm going to put that in the follow-up email as well. If you want to chat with an attorney in your area, it's pretty cheap. I've used it before myself. It's $5 for 7 days and then $55 per month after that. They'll connect you with an attorney in your area, and you can just ask them quick questions like this and they'll chat back to you online. They're not going to file documents or go to court for you, but they will give you like a quick yes, that this does apply to you or it doesn't apply to you. And that's really helpful, especially with all of these really like super specific local laws. Dave says, can the declination letter only be sent to the prospective tenant, or can they be sent to the renter's agent on their behalf? Chicago, Cook County, definitely use that just answer chat with an attorney feature I was mentioning. Cook County has very specific laws to that, so I don't want to give you any bad information there, Dave. Let's see. David Ola, services and costs. So I'll include that in the follow-up email, AAOA.com or tenantalert.com. Okay. Jared says, can you evict a tenant for smoking cannabis inside their apartment in Pasadena? Certainly you could try, but what's going to happen is if you go through a process of, it's technically a lease breach, then the judge, if it gets to court, is basically going to try to give the tenant a chance to fix the problem. So they might just say, well, yeah, I'm going to stop smoking. And then they go back to smoking. The other thing that might happen is that they're going to want to see evidence of that person smoking, and that might be difficult to obtain. You can get eyewitnesses, start collecting statements from neighbors. That might help. If you're trying to build a case to take it to court, you definitely want to start talking to an attorney now. It's not impossible, but it is very difficult. And I see Andy put, if it's related to a medical necessity, it may be even more difficult. Not really, Andy, because if it's medical, they don't have to smoke it. They can eat it or topically, apply it. So it doesn't have to be smoked. I think that's part of the reason why even if it's medical, it's not always seen that way as like a reason to smoke particularly. So yeah, start building a case. I mean, again, it's not impossible, but it is difficult to prove. Okay, what about, let's see here, screening for midterm rentals or corporate lease tenants? Jamie, we have a business credit report. So if your corporation is going to lease, you can run a business credit report, make sure they're not about to go bankrupt. So that might be an additional thing that you want to add. It is one of our add-on reports. And for Tenant Alert, you can call us to ask to add it to your account. It does take about a day to get the results back. It will tell you how much debt the company has, the likelihood of bankruptcy, and any lawsuits against the company as well. Okay, how are landlords getting around the one tenant application fee? Tenants are shopping around. You don't know how they retain their application. Yeah, there is definitely some laws. So California has one where they're doing this thing called reusable tenant screening. Basically, what I say to that is just still run your own tenant screening report. The only thing is like you can't charge them for it. So, I mean, you don't have to use what they're giving you. The point of that law is so that they're not paying a bunch of application fees over and over again. So I would say, David, keep screening. Tell them thank you for providing this, and then do your own screening report and just don't charge them if that's the case. Okay, so I know there's a few more left, but we're almost at an hour and 40 minutes. And guys, I might be losing my voice. So thank you for sticking around for so long. I'm glad that you had so many questions. And as I mentioned before, I'm absolutely going to be sending you all this recording and the slides, as well as all of the resources that I stated. I made notes as to exactly what I'm going to send you all. So make sure you take a look tomorrow at that email, and it will also have an invite to our next webinar. And really, honestly, thank you all for sticking around. And I hope you learned something new. I try to bring up as much information as I can. I know it's so much to keep up with, but we're still going to be doing these webinars, I think, years to come. So stay tuned. I'll probably be back in a few months with another update. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Take care, everyone. Bye.